The massive view screen in United Earth Command's central chamber displayed a holographic representation that defied traditional understanding of space and communication. Grand Arbiter Zoraktal of the Krell-Nax Imperium wasn't merely projecting an image. He was existing simultaneously across multiple quantum states, a technological marvel that had intimidated countless species before humanity. Captain Jack Harper studied the alien with a mixture of professional detachment and barely contained curiosity. The Krell-Nax were known for their crystalline exoskeleton and multidimensional perception, species that had dominated galactic politics for over 3,000 years. Their biology was so advanced that most species considered them near godlike in technological capability. Beside Jack, Lauren Rodriguez kept her posture perfectly neutral. As Earth's lead diplomatic strategist, she had spent decades studying alien communication patterns, cultural nuances, and the complex web of galactic political dynamics. Her dark eyes flickered between Zoraktal and the holographic data streams running along the chamber's peripheral displays. Humanity's recent actions have been deemed problematic, Zoraktal began, his voice a complex harmonic that seemed to resonate both externally and within the listeners' minds. Your technological progression, military innovations, and complete disregard for established galactic protocols represent a significant threat to the current political stability. The chamber remained silent. Veteran diplomats, military strategists, and political advisors watched with a collective tension that could have been cut with a quantum blade. Jack knew the history. Humanity had emerged on the galactic stage less than a century ago, discovered by the Krell-Nax during a routine stellar survey. Initial encounters had been patronizing, the advanced species viewing humans as primitive, barely worthy of acknowledgement. But something unexpected had happened. Humans didn't just adapt, they innovated. Every technological limitation presented to them became an opportunity. Where other species saw boundaries, humans saw challenges to be overcome. Faster-than-light communication, solved through quantum entanglement networks that made traditional communication look like smoke signals. Advanced weaponry. Humans developed adaptive systems that could reconfigure themselves mid-battle, learning and evolving faster than any predictive algorithm could track. The Galactic Council had watched with growing unease. Humanity's rise was unprecedented. In mere decades, they had developed technologies that took other species millennia to conceptualize. Worse, humans didn't just create these technologies. They democratized them, shared them, transformed them in ways that threatened the carefully constructed power structures of established civilizations. Zoraktal's multiple eyes focused with an intensity that would have made lesser species tremble. The Galactic Council has deliberated extensively. Your continued unrestricted development poses an existential risk to the current galactic order. Lauren's hand, resting casually on the podium, was rock steady. She had reviewed every possible scenario, war-gamed every potential diplomatic approach. The data was clear. Humanity was being presented with an ultimatum designed to crush their spirit, to force submission through overwhelming technological and political pressure. Your options are limited, Zoraktal continued, a hint of what might have been anticipation threading through his multidimensional communication. 70% of your planetary resources will be requisitioned. Your technological development will be placed under strict galactic oversight. Military capabilities will be completely dismantled. The subtext was clear. This wasn't a negotiation. This was a death sentence disguised as diplomatic protocol. Jack observed the alien's projection, noting subtle quantum fluctuations that suggested emotional states beyond human comprehension. The Krell-Nax truly believed this was a mercy. They saw themselves as benevolent administrators of galactic stability, pruning potentially dangerous species before they could become genuine threats. What they didn't understand was humanity's fundamental nature. Every limitation was an invitation. Every restriction, a challenge. The chamber waited. Generations of human potential, centuries of accumulated resilience, the collective spirit of a species that had clawed its way from prehistoric caves to interstellar capability, all of it concentrated in this singular moment. Zorectal's projection remained steady, waiting for the predictable human response of fear, negotiation, or capitulation. He would be disappointed. Silence stretched across the United Earth Command Center. The holographic transmission from the Galactic Council hung in the air, a living testament to millennia of alien political manipulation. Lauren Rodriguez felt the weight of human history pressing against her shoulders, the collective hopes and defiances of generations condensed into this singular moment. Her family's history was etched into humanity's struggle. Her grandmother had been among the first human diplomats to make contact with extraterrestrial civilizations, navigating a landscape of potential extinction and unprecedented opportunity. Her mother had spent decades developing communication protocols that allowed humanity to survive those initial, treacherous interactions. And now, Lauren stood as the culmination of that legacy. The quantum communication systems hummed softly around her, an invisible network of human innovation that the Krell-Nax believed they had fully mapped. They were wrong. So wonderfully, catastrophically wrong. Grand Arbiter Zorectal's multidimensional projection continued to pulse with what could only be described as anticipatory condescension. Each of his crystalline eyes seemed to look through Lauren, expecting the typical response of a young species: terror, negotiation, submission. Lauren's mind raced through centuries of human history. The countless times humanity had been underestimated. The indigenous populations crushed by technological superiority. The early explorers who refused to bow. The civil rights movements. The technological revolutions. The space race. Every moment of human history had been defined by one fundamental characteristic: an absolute refusal to accept imposed limitations. She thought of the classified research programs hidden beneath mundane government facilities. Quantum communication networks that could transmit information faster than thought. Adaptive technological systems that could learn and evolve mid-process. Psychological warfare technologies that could deconstruct entire civilizations without firing a single weapon. The Galactic Council saw a young species. They saw a potential threat to be controlled. They did not see humanity. Lauren's fingers, almost imperceptibly, touched the quantum communication implant at the base of her neck. A silent command rippled through Earth's entire defensive and communication infrastructure. Millions of systems, from orbital defense platforms to subterranean research facilities, synchronized in a heartbeat. Zorectal continued his proclamation, listing the resources to be stripped, the technologies to be dismantled, the sovereignty to be surrendered. His voice was a complex harmonic that should have induced a psychological response of submission in lesser species. In that moment, Lauren understood the true power of their response. It wasn't just about defiance. It was about redefining the entire concept of galactic interaction. She stepped forward. The entire command center held its collective breath. Military commanders, diplomatic strategists, technological experts, all watched with a mixture of anticipation and profound understanding. And then she spoke. No. The word was simple, unequivocal. A complete rejection that carried the weight of an entire species' accumulated potential. In that single syllable, Lauren compressed generations of human spirit. The word wasn't just a refusal. It was a declaration of existence. A challenge to millennia of galactic political assumptions. A quantum shockwave that would reverberate through every alien communication network. The effects were instantaneous. Zorectal's multidimensional projection flickered. For the first time in his centuries-long diplomatic career, the Grand Arbiter experienced something unprecedented, complete, absolute surprise. Quantum communication networks across human-controlled systems began to pulse with an energy that defied known physical laws. Information began to flow in patterns that would take alien civilizations decades to even begin comprehending. Lauren watched the aliens' reaction with a calm that bordered on clinical detachment. Every movement, every quantum fluctuation in the communication network was being recorded, analyzed, prepared for the inevitable conflict to come. The single word had been more than a response. It was the first shot in a war that would reshape galactic civilization. Humanity had just entered the stage of galactic politics, and they were not here to follow the script. The global defense network came alive with a precision that defied conventional understanding of military preparedness. Deep beneath the Rocky Mountains, the North American Quantum Defense Hub began its silent activation sequence. Rows upon rows of quantum processors, each no larger than a human fingernail, began to synchronize in a complex dance of computational potential. Dr. Marcus Reyes, head of Earth's Advanced Systems Integration, watched the initial response unfold with a mixture of professional excitement and calculated calm. The systems humanity had been developing were not mere weapons or communication networks. They were living, adaptive organisms of pure technological potential. The Krellnax and their Galactic Council allies had no concept of what was about to be unleashed. Quantum entanglement communication networks sparked into full deployment. Thousands of satellites, orbital platforms, and ground-based systems began to interlink in ways that would appear completely nonsensical to any external observer. Information began to flow not in linear streams, but in multi-dimensional probability waves that could simultaneously exist and not exist. Marcus remembered the early days of development, the countless failures, the moments when human scientists were told their concepts were impossible. Faster-than-light communication, impossible. Adaptive technological systems that could learn and evolve in microseconds, a fantasy. Quantum probability warfare, pure science fiction. Humanity had a unique gift for turning the impossible into the mundane. The first signs of the technological escalation began subtly. Alien surveillance systems started to experience inexplicable glitches. Tracking algorithms developed by the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy suddenly found themselves unable to maintain consistent lock on human vessels and communication signatures. It wasn't that human technology was simply advanced. It was fundamentally different. Where alien technological development followed linear, predictable paths, human innovation was chaos given purpose. Each limitation was an invitation to reinvent the entire concept of technological interaction. The quantum communication networks now activating were not just communication systems. They were living, evolving entities that could adapt faster than any predictive algorithm could track. In orbit, the first demonstration of human technological capability began to take shape. What appeared to be a standard defensive satellite suddenly shifted. Its molecular structure began to reconfigure, adaptive materials allowing it to transform from a passive communication relay to a complex defensive platform in milliseconds. The technological gap was about to become a technological canyon. Marcus watched the initial deployment with a critical eye. Years of development, billions in research, countless failed prototypes, all converging in this moment. The quantum processors weren't just computing. They were thinking, learning, evolving with each microsecond of interaction. Alien intelligence gathering systems began to experience total breakdown. Human communication signatures became quantum ghosts, existing in multiple states simultaneously, impossible to track, predict, or understand. Military analysts across the Galactic Council would spend decades trying to comprehend what was happening. The adaptive camouflage technologies represented the true breakthrough. Human vessels could now exist in multiple probability states, their molecular structures capable of instant reconfiguration. A ship could simultaneously be a communication relay, a defensive platform, and a weapon of unprecedented complexity. Marcus allowed himself a slight smile. The Krellnax believed they were dealing with a young, predictable species. They were about to learn the most expensive lesson in galactic history. Quantum probability warfare was more than a technological concept. It was a fundamental reimagining of conflict itself. Human systems could now exist in a state of simultaneous potential. A vessel could be detected and undetected, present and absent, a threat and a non-threat, all at the same moment. The first wave of technological deployment was nothing short of a revolution. Traditional surveillance became useless. Predictive algorithms collapsed. The very foundations of galactic military technological assumptions began to crumble. Humanity wasn't just preparing for a conflict. They were rewriting the entire concept of technological interaction. And they were just getting started. The Krellnax invasion fleet emerged from hyperspace like a metal constellation, 10,000 warships spreading across the solar system with mathematical precision. Each vessel represented centuries of technological refinement, weapon systems that had subjugated countless civilizations, shields that could withstand direct planetary bombardment. Captain Jack Harper stood on the bridge of the U.S. Defiance, a command vessel that looked deceptively simple compared to the alien armada. Holographic displays danced around him, quantum probability matrices showing potential engagement scenarios that shifted faster than human perception could track. Incoming transmission, Lieutenant Emma Chen announced, her voice steady, despite the monumental threat bearing down on their home system. The alien fleet commander's projection materialized, a crystalline being named Vornak, whose very existence represented the pinnacle of Krellnax military evolution. Confidence radiated from every quantum of its being. Humanity's resistance ends now, the transmission declared. Surrender is the only logical outcome. Jack's response was a series of microscopic commands sent through the quantum communication network. To an outside observer, nothing seemed to happen. But everything was changing. The first signs of humanity's technological superiority began subtly. Krellnax tracking systems started experiencing inexplicable quantum interference. Weapon targeting computers began to return impossible readings. Ships that should have been perfectly visible began to flicker in and out of perceptual existence. Vornak's confidence began to waver. On the U.S. Defiance, tactical displays showed the true nature of human defensive strategy. It wasn't about stopping the invasion. It was about deconstructing the very concept of invasion itself. Human vessels didn't just move. They existed in multiple probability states simultaneously. A single ship could appear in 6 different locations, each version partially real, partially potential. Weapon systems that should have been fixed became fluid, adaptive constructs that could reconfigure themselves mid-engagement. The first wave of Krellnax attacks revealed the depth of human preparation. Missiles launched with pinpoint accuracy suddenly found their trajectories impossibly altered. Targeting systems collapsed as human vessels became quantum ghosts, existing and not existing in the same moment. Vornak's tactical display became a nightmare of impossible data. Ships that should have been destroyed remained intact. Weapon strikes passed through human vessels like they were made of mist. The fundamental laws of space warfare began to unravel. Jack understood the psychological warfare, as well as the technological one. This wasn't just about defeating an invasion. It was about demonstrating the fundamental difference between human and alien approach to conflict. Where the Krellnax saw warfare as a mathematical equation, humans saw it as a dynamic, living system. Each engagement was a conversation, not a calculation. Adaptive systems learned and evolved in real time, turning each moment of conflict into an opportunity for innovation. Entire squadrons of Krellnax ships found themselves suddenly surrounded by what appeared to be multiple versions of the same human vessel. Were they real? Holographic decoys, quantum projections. The uncertainty became a weapon more devastating than any physical strike. Lieutenant Chen's hands danced across quantum interface systems. Each command was more than an instruction. It was a living strategy that could adapt and evolve millisecond by millisecond. Human vessels began to network their defensive capabilities, creating a living, breathing defensive organism that was more than the sum of its parts. The first hour of engagement saw the destruction of nearly 300 Krellnax vessels, but they weren't destroyed in any traditional sense. They simply ceased to exist. Weapon strikes passed through them. Navigation systems collapsed. Crews found themselves experiencing multiple realities simultaneously. Vornak's confidence transformed into something closer to existential terror. Humanity wasn't just defending. They were rewriting the entire concept of spatial engagement. The invasion was becoming a lesson, and the galaxy was watching. Lauren Rodriguez sat in the central communication hub of the Global Information Warfare Division, surrounded by a constellation of holographic displays that pulsed with living data. This was humanity's most potent weapon, not the quantum ships or adaptive technologies, but the ability to deconstruct entire civilizations through pure information. The Galactic Council had maintained its power through carefully constructed narratives, centuries of diplomatic manipulation, controlled information streams, a complex web of half-truths, and strategic omissions that kept member species in carefully managed hierarchies. Humanity was about to tear that entire system apart. The first wave of information releases began as a carefully choreographed cascade. Quantum communication networks simultaneously broadcast to every member civilization of the Galactic Council. Each transmission was a precision-crafted narrative weapon, designed to penetrate the most sophisticated information defense systems. Hidden archives emerged, suppressed histories, documented atrocities. The true cost of the Galactic Council's peacekeeping became brutally apparent. The Zornax civilization received documentation of their species' systematic genetic manipulation by council overseers, centuries of controlled breeding, designed to make them perfect bureaucratic workers. Images and unfiltered data streams showed the horrifying extent of their genetic oppression. The Krellnax themselves became the primary target. Their own historical archives, previously locked behind layers of quantum encryption, were now laid bare. Documentation of hundreds of civilizations systematically crushed, entire species redirected or eliminated to maintain the Council's political stability. Lauren watched the information spread like a living organism. Each piece of data was more than just a fact. It was a quantum-encoded narrative designed to penetrate psychological defenses, to challenge fundamental beliefs about galactic civilization. Dr. Marcus Reyes, working in tandem from the Technological Warfare Division, had developed something unprecedented. The information streams weren't just broadcasts. They were adaptive psychological algorithms that could modify their approach in real time, targeting specific cultural and psychological vulnerabilities of each receiving civilization. The human team understood a fundamental truth that the Galactic Council had forgotten. Information was not just data. It was a living, breathing weapon of unprecedented complexity. Diplomatic channels across the galaxy began to fracture. Species that had been subservient for generations suddenly found themselves asking dangerous questions. The carefully maintained illusion of galactic stability began to crumble. The Vorlon, a species that had been the Council's primary administrative support for centuries, discovered documents revealing how their entire civilization had been strategically limited. Technological developments had been systematically suppressed. Their potential had been deliberately contained. Lauren's team had spent years preparing this moment. Every piece of information was a precision-guided narrative missile designed to penetrate the most sophisticated psychological defenses. The human approach was fundamentally different from traditional information warfare. This wasn't about controlling the narrative. It was about destroying the very concept of a controlled narrative. Quantum communication networks ensured that the information couldn't be stopped. Each transmission existed in multiple states simultaneously, impossible to fully block or contain. For every attempt to suppress the information, multiple alternative transmission paths would emerge. The Galactic Council's communication systems began to experience total breakdown. Their carefully maintained information firewalls collapsed like tissue paper against a quantum hurricane. Species began to communicate directly with each other, bypassing the Council's traditional communication channels. Suppressed histories, shared experiences of systematic oppression. The entire galactic political landscape began to reshape itself in real time. Lauren understood the true power of what they were doing. This wasn't just a war. It was a fundamental reimagining of galactic civilization. By the end of the first transmission cycle, the Galactic Council's power had been fundamentally and irrevocably challenged. Humanity had weaponized information in a way no civilization had ever conceived possible. And they were just getting started. The Galactic Council chambers had never experienced such profound silence. What had once been a pinnacle of interstellar diplomacy now resembled a shattered ecosystem of political relationships. Ambassadors from hundreds of civilizations sat frozen, the weight of humanity's revelations crushing their carefully maintained illusions. Grand Arbiter Zorektal of the Krell-Nax Imperium found himself in an unprecedented position: total political isolation. The quantum communication networks continued to pulse with revelations, each transmission peeling back layers of historical manipulation that had sustained the Council's power for millennia. The Vorlon delegation was the first to break formation. Ambassador Krellma stood, her crystalline exoskeleton flickering with emotional turbulence, unprecedented in her species' diplomatic history. "We demand a full investigation," she declared, her voice cutting through the chamber's tension. Generations of subservience have been replaced by a sudden, explosive awareness of their species' systematic suppression. Technological archives revealed the extent of the Council's control. The Vorlon had been systematically limited, their technological potential deliberately constrained. Entire generations of scientific breakthrough had been quietly eliminated, redirected, or outright destroyed to maintain the existing power structure. The Zornax representatives began to compile their own internal investigation. Genetic manipulation records showed decades of controlled breeding, a horrifying system of biological management that reduced their entire civilization to nothing more than carefully cultivated resources. Jack Harper watched the proceedings from a secure transmission hub, understanding the true complexity of their strategy. This wasn't just about military conflict. It was about dismantling an entire system of galactic governance through pure, unfiltered information. Lauren Rodriguez's psychological warfare team had prepared for this moment with mathematical precision. Each revelation was designed to create maximum disruption, targeting the specific vulnerabilities of each Council member civilization. The information streams were living entities, adaptive algorithms that could modify their approach in real time. The Krell-Nax found themselves at the center of the unfolding catastrophe. Their historical archives, previously locked behind layers of quantum encryption, now lay bare for every civilization to examine. Hundreds of suppressed histories emerged, civilizations redirected, species systematically eliminated, entire technological developments crushed to maintain political stability. Ambassador Vornak of the Krell-Nax tried to restore order, but the chamber had become a maelstrom of competing narratives. Diplomatic protocols collapsed. Communication channels fractured. The carefully maintained illusion of galactic stability began to disintegrate like tissue paper in a quantum storm. Dr. Marcus Reyes monitored the transmission networks, watching the cascading effects of their information campaign. What humanity had unleashed was more than a war. It was a complete systemic reset of galactic political understanding. Species that had been subservient for generations suddenly found their voices. Suppressed histories emerged. Documented atrocities became public knowledge. The true cost of the Council's peacekeeping became brutally apparent. The transmission networks continued their relentless assault. Each piece of information was a precision-guided narrative missile designed to penetrate the most sophisticated psychological defenses. Quantum communication technologies ensured that the information couldn't be stopped, existing simultaneously across multiple transmission paths. Zorektal realized the fundamental mistake they had made with humanity. This wasn't a species that could be controlled or manipulated. This was a civilization that saw limitations as invitations to reimagine entire systems of existence. By the end of the first transmission cycle, the Galactic Council had been fundamentally and irrevocably transformed. Diplomatic relationships that had existed for millennia collapsed in moments. Species began communicating directly, bypassing traditional council channels. The human strategy became clear. They weren't just challenging the council. They were providing the tools for every oppressed civilization to reclaim their own narrative. Humanity had weaponized information in a way no civilization had ever conceived possible. And they were just getting started. Grand Arbiter Zorektal's final assault was nothing short of desperation. A massive fleet converged on the Sol system, carrying the accumulated military might of civilizations that had dominated the galaxy for millennia. 10,000 warships represented the absolute pinnacle of alien military technology. Weapon systems that had crushed countless emerging civilizations, shield technologies that could withstand direct planetary bombardment. They would find something entirely unexpected. Captain Jack Harper stood on the bridge of the U.S. Defiance, the command vessel that had become a symbol of human technological innovation. Around him, the entire solar system had transformed into a living, breathing defensive organism. Earth was no longer just a planet. It was the most formidable weapon in human arsenal. The first wave of the alien assault began with mathematical precision. Thousands of ships emerged from hyperspace, their weapon systems charging with enough energy to obliterate entire planetary systems. Vornak, leading the assault, expected total capitulation. Humanity had other plans. Orbital defense platforms began to shift and reconfigure. What appeared to be simple communication relays transformed into complex defensive systems. Molecular adaptive technologies allowed entire sections of human infrastructure to become active defensive mechanisms. Satellites became weapons. Communication arrays became shield generators. Every human-built system was now a potential point of resistance. The quantum probability warfare reached its apex. Human vessels didn't just defend. They existed in multiple states simultaneously. A single ship could appear in 6 different locations, each version partially real, partially potential. Weapon strikes passed through them like they were made of mist. Targeting systems collapsed as human technology became something beyond traditional understanding. Lauren Rodriguez coordinated from the Global Defense Command Center, her quantum communication implants allowing her to interface directly with the solar system's defensive network. Each movement was a complex dance of probability, technological innovation, transforming the very concept of spatial engagement. The first hour of confrontation defied every known law of military conflict. Entire squadrons of Krellnack ships found themselves surrounded by what appeared to be multiple versions of the same human vessel. Weapon systems became useless. Navigation computers collapsed into cascading error states. Crews experienced multiple realities simultaneously. Dr. Marcus Reyes had prepared for this moment. The defensive systems were more than technological constructs. They were living, evolving entities that could adapt faster than any predictive algorithm could track. Planetary defense became a fluid concept. Sections of Earth's surface could reconfigure themselves. Mountain ranges became defensive platforms. Oceanic environments transformed into complex weapon systems. Every inch of human territory was now a potential point of resistance. Vornak's tactical display became a nightmare of impossible data. Ships that should have been destroyed remained intact. Weapon strikes passed through human vessels like they were made of quantum mist. The fundamental laws of space warfare began to unravel. The human approach was fundamentally different. Where alien civilizations saw warfare as a mathematical equation, humans saw it as a dynamic, living system. Each engagement was a conversation, not a calculation. Adaptive systems learned and evolved in real time, turning each moment of conflict into an opportunity for innovation. Quantum communication networks ensured that each defensive action was simultaneously a communication, a weapon, and a strategic maneuver. Human systems didn't just respond to the attack. They anticipated, adapted, and transformed the very nature of the conflict. By the battle's midpoint, nearly half of the Krellnack's invasion force had simply ceased to exist. Not destroyed in any traditional sense, they simply found themselves unable to maintain coherent existence within the human defensive matrix. Jack Harper's final tactical maneuver would be studied by military academies for centuries. A simultaneous multi-dimensional assault that didn't just defeat the invasion but completely deconstructed the concept of invasion itself. The solar system had become a living weapon. Humanity wasn't just defending. They were rewriting the entire concept of spatial engagement. The invasion was becoming a lesson, and the galaxy was watching. The aftermath of the conflict defied every established principle of galactic diplomacy. Where one might have expected retribution, humanity proposed something unprecedented, a complete reimagining of intergalactic cooperation. Lauren Rodriguez stood at the center of the Provisional Galactic Reconstruction Summit, surrounded by representatives from civilizations that had, mere weeks ago, been either subjugated or silent. The chamber itself was a testament to human innovation, a quantum adaptive space that could simultaneously translate, analyze, and mediate communication across hundreds of different species and communication modalities. "We are not here to replace the old system," Lauren began, her voice carrying through translation matrices that captured not just words, but intent, cultural nuance, and emotional subtext. "We are here to create something entirely new." The proposal was radical in its simplicity, a galactic governance model based on three fundamental principles: technological transparency, cultural self-determination, and collaborative innovation. Dr. Marcus Reyes had spent years developing the technological infrastructure that would support this new approach. Quantum communication networks that could provide instantaneous, unfiltered information exchange. Adaptive diplomatic protocols that could evolve in real time. Systems that prioritize collective growth over individual dominance. Jack Harper represented the military perspective, demonstrating how defensive capabilities could be shared rather than hoarded. The human approach was fundamentally different from the Krellnack's model of control. Defense wasn't about suppression. It was about mutual protection and collective advancement. The Vorlon delegation, recently liberated from centuries of genetic and technological suppression, found themselves at the forefront of this new approach. Their scientists began sharing research that had been deliberately contained for generations. Technological developments that had been crushed now found fertile ground for exploration. The Zornak's representatives presented their own transformation. Genetic records revealed decades of manipulated breeding were being systematically dismantled. Each species would now have the right to determine its own evolutionary path. Zoraktul, the former Grand Arbiter, sat in a position that would have been unimaginable weeks earlier. Not as a ruler, but as a participant. The Krellnacks were being required to open their own historical archives to account for centuries of systematic oppression. The quantum communication networks that had been humanity's primary weapon now became tools of unprecedented diplomatic transparency. Every decision, every negotiation would be accessible. No more hidden agendas. No more suppressed histories. Earth had become more than a planet. It was now a central hub of galactic reconstruction, a living example of how a civilization could transform from a potential threat to a collaborative partner. The technological sharing was breathtaking. Species that had been technologically limited began to receive access to developmental resources. Adaptive learning systems allowed for rapid technological transfer without the risks of cultural invasion. Lauren understood the true complexity of what they were achieving. This wasn't just diplomatic reconstruction. It was a fundamental reimagining of how civilizations could interact. The single word that had started it all, "no," became a symbol of something larger. A rejection of systemic oppression. A declaration of potential. A challenge to every established concept of galactic interaction. Each species would maintain its sovereignty. Each civilization would have the right to its own developmental path. The new galactic framework wasn't about control. It was about collaborative potential. Quantum diplomatic matrices allowed for unprecedented levels of communication. Translation systems that captured not just language, but cultural context. Adaptive protocols that could navigate the complex interactions between hundreds of different species. The Krellnacks found themselves in a position they had never conceived possible. From rulers to participants. From controllers to collaborators. Jack Harper summarized the human perspective in a statement that would be quoted for generations. Potential is not a threat. It's an opportunity. As the first summit concluded, something extraordinary became clear. Humanity had not just defeated an oppressive system. They had provided a blueprint for a fundamentally different way of existing. The galaxy would never be the same, and it had all started with a single word.